Little baby.
Amen.
Well, friends, thank you so much for being here tonight. Britt, go ahead and mute everybody, and I'll unmute myself.
Okay, because I end up muting you, so if you can do that.
And it might have been to the desire for everybody too. So, friends, thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to this conversation tonight and this dialogue. There we go. And as you know, we've this is our third week, and it's been good. It's been life-giving. It's been life-giving for me. I pray that it's been life-giving for you, and just thinking about how we are going to continue to work on being anti-racist in our communities, how we are going to develop the abilities within our hearts and within our spirits to deconstruct whatever it might be within us, that we need to, let go of those things, that we can forever be more aware of those who are around us, the situations that people live in, the situations that we live in that perhaps have caused the situations that people live in. And it takes that personal work, but when we start doing that personal individual work, it just can't stay there. It has to be something that goes to the next level. So that might be your immediate family. Then it can go out to the next ring of relatives. Then it can go out to the next ring of community, where you work, where you do your grocery shopping, where you do life. And then it's further and further out. And so that's the work we're on. We want to continue to grow. We want to continue to develop. We want to continue to press into some hard conversations and watch that development and growth happen. One thing that I really want us to think about doing tonight is have some good conversation and dialogue. I was very thankful last week how you guys had some really solid questions. You were paying attention to some key things that Ray was saying, and you put them in the chat room. So yes, we want to celebrate that David Baker from Asheville with his big black bears that were in his front yard yesterday is with us. But we also want that chat space to be a space where you can say, ooh, that stung a little bit. Let's talk about this. Or, hey, I've always wondered about fill in the blank. Can you say more about that? And we will do our best to attend to those questions and those points that are rising in your hearts, so that we can grow together and that we can continue to live differently in our world and in our community, for our world and for our community. So as I did the last 2 weeks, I'm going to do it again this week. I want us to listen to these words from our baptismal covenant, and go ahead and be in a place of prayer as I read these, and then I will continue in prayer to start us off. So let's go to God in prayer. Do you confess Jesus Christ as your Savior? Put your whole trust in His grace and promise to serve Him as your Lord in union with the church which Christ has opened to people of all ages, nations, and races. Gracious God, we're so thankful for this evening. We're so thankful that our hearts are coming together in this space to be troubled and to be stirred, that our spirits are yearning to know more about what we need to do to deconstruct, to reconstruct as closer disciples to you. And as we draw closer to you, God, we draw closer to our neighbor. And that is a beautiful and wonderful gift that you have offered us and that we are to journey into. So be with us in conversation. Free our spirits, free our minds to hear something new. Free our spirits and free our minds to ask hard questions and to ask hard questions and accountability of ourselves to grow in this space. So be with us in conversation that we might flourish for the sake of your kingdom. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
So friends, tonight's topic is white privilege. And white privilege is a term that has really taken off in the past. I think about 8 years is really when I started to really pay attention and hear it and key into it in 2012, and it just started to come into mainstream conversation. However, white privilege is not something that's new. It's not something that was just developed in 2012 or 28 or 2008 or 1973 or whatever it might be. White privilege has been around for a significantly long time. Something, if you remember back from our first session, if you were there, if you were not, I'll give you a recap real fast. We talked about how we have gotten to the places that we are as white people. And one of those ways is that the Euro man has been centralized and has become normalized as the comparison to everything else, everybody else, that everybody is compared to the white Euro man. And that's centralized that person, that's centralized ideas, it's centralized theology, it's centralized all these concepts and constructs of race and where culture is and isn't today. And so that is what has fed into white privilege, into this understanding of white privilege. And so I just want to take a moment to read a couple little definitions, if you will. These aren't from Merriam-Webster, but a compilation of some articles and books that I've read, and perhaps you came across some of these in your own personal research, some of the readings, listenings, watchings that we put out there for you to prep for tonight's class. So in a definition of white privilege, it's a life-easing advantage. Whiteness is the baseline with unearned assets. White privilege is an idea that just by being white, you are given the benefit of the doubt. It's not socioeconomically based. White privilege, you can always assume you have a spot in line of life. And then the other one, white privilege, it's the level of societal advantage that comes with being seen as the norm in America, automatically conferred, irrespective of wealth, gender, or other factors. It makes life smoother, but it's something you would barely notice unless it were suddenly taken away, or unless it had never applied to you in the first place. So white privilege, it's all over the place in definition, but all comes back to that centralized norm of white male-centric. There's various streams of thoughts and breakdown of not only is it the Euro whiteness, but it's also Euro white male that's on top of that whole patriarchal hierarchical structure. And there's some really great further reading I commend to you if you're wanting to explore this thought some more about how it can, it's not only there's racist tendencies in there, but there's gender, there's sexism into it as well. And that's something that's, we don't have time to dive into that tonight, but it definitely plays into this conversation full tilt, and even more so where the Black woman's experience and how they're in all of the structure is even more oppressed and even more segregated and pushed apart, which is something that we have to continue to work on deconstructing so that we can see equity and equality throughout our communities. So I just wanted to set that up for you. And one of the things that white privilege can do and can cause is also deflection statements. So one of those I just want to set in your minds to think about, because we'll want to talk about it later, or if you've ever found yourself deflecting or ever pushing away from this, is, well, they got affirmative action. Isn't that enough? And that is something that is so painful and so harmful to say or think about. And there's that one comment, there's multiple other comments that are made to deflect from owning and knowing what white privilege is, or really taking responsibility for it and the pain that it brings. So tonight's guest, with all that in your mind right now, start thinking your questions and start thinking about thoughts that you want to have fleshed out later. We are very thankful. You might know him. His name is James Howe. James has agreed to be in conversation helping lead tonight's dialogue with us. And so, James, thank you so much for your willingness. Thank you for your vulnerability. Thank you for being here and helping us all learn a little more through your story.
Yeah, thanks. Nathan emailed me a while back and said, who could we get to talk about white privilege? I said, me. I was joking. Although I do have the benefit, so I'm a guy that I've lived with white privilege for 64 years. I even now have the privilege of a lot of white hair on my head. It's just a thing, anyway. So Nathan, thinking about comments that people make. I was in a race conversation with somebody a while. This is a few years back. This is when Obama was still president, and his deflection. I love the way he phrased it. He said, "We gave them the White House." It was kind of interesting. We gave them the White House. So anyway, so white privilege. My view of this, I discovered a number of years ago. I brought this up in a sermon, and I got battered all Sunday afternoon from people. And I realized people read that as like an indictment, as a criticism, as damnation. White privilege. I don't feel that way about it. It's not a criticism. It's not like I've been charged with a crime. It just is, right? White privilege. It's just a thing. Part of it feeds into meritocracy ideas. A lot of people, they don't like any sense of privilege. People tell me all the time, I've worked hard for what I've earned. But I tried to say this morning at our Readyset Pray thing, that I'm glad I don't look at my life and think I've worked hard and look at all I've achieved. I just don't feel that way. I feel like I've been lucky. People have been kind to me. People give me a chance. They've been patient with me. I had a coach. I had a teacher. I had a grandparent. We're all just such lucky dogs of people who've been kind to us. So anyway, so it feeds into that. There's also the issue that, I'm 64 years old, and what I've learned in 64 years is what I don't know and haven't figured out, and what I've been confused about. When I was 28, I thought I was pretty darn smart, but now I know what I don't know, and I love not knowing what I don't know. But I run into people all the time. They've got the world all figured out. And to me, I love people like that. I love them, but I feel for them because they're missing out on so much. So anyway, white privilege. Let me just rattle through a few experiences that I had when I was up in Davidson, the church there. The Davidson College freshmen would show up, and they had little small groups. They'd read a book in the summer and come in for conversation before classes began. I always got to lead one of those classes. It was great fun. And one of the questions that we always ask these Davidson students, and these are well-educated, very smart young people. And the question that would be addressed to them is, talk about your ethnicity. And it, almost to a person, these white, well-educated 18-year-olds would say, I don't have ethnicity. Right? They thought ethnicity was like something other people have that we don't have. And I thought, well, of course, you're living in a world where you don't even seem to have ethnicity because you think who you are is just the norm so much. I have found in sermons and classes over the years, if I say Jesus wasn't white, people get a little hysterical. Like they've seen pictures of him in the hallway at the church and in their Bibles. And they go, of course he's a white guy. And I find people even get more mortified. This is interesting. It's when I say Mary wasn't white. People will argue with me about Mary. They'll let Jesus go, right? He's just a guy thing. But with Mary, they'll argue with me. Say, oh, no, she was very fair. Why? Anyway, it's just hilarious. In my email this morning, if you read that, I referenced something that Jessica Dason brought up in our four-way sermon Sunday before last. It's a moment from Little Fires Everywhere, where the white privileged woman is saying to the black woman that she's hired to be her maid, she said, you need to make good choices. And Mia responds by saying, you didn't make good choices, you had good choices. And that phrase is just stuck in my mind. And it's just a thing, white people have more good choices. It's not about making, I mentioned this morning in my email, I heard a mom, she was so stressed because her son was trying to decide whether to go to Davidson or Sewanee. That's a hard decision, but he has good choices, right? That's the thing. So again, on my email, just remind you a couple of these things. When I was in school, I always heard girls aren't good at math. I was a boy, so I was good at math. The school's integrated while I was in junior high school. I remember very clearly the teacher saying, oh God, I've got a black boy. He's not going to be good at math. What? But as a white guy, I was told you will be good at math. And I became good at math. When white people are good at things, nobody is surprised. My friend Stephanie Hand, who's an ordained pastor, she's African American. This has happened so many times. People will try to describe Stephanie and they'll say, she is so well spoken. Well, nobody ever looks at James Howell and says, that young man is so well spoken. It's because she's black and they're making some doing that. Or I think about the scene in the movie Get Out, which if you haven't seen it, it's a little spooky at the end. Don't show it to your children.
No.
But a white girl brings her black boyfriend home to meet the parents. And the dad, here's white fragility, right? The dad says, I voted for Obama. You know, he's trying to like show his like black friendly credentials. It's just funny. The being stopped in traffic thing. I've been stopped in traffic, but it's always been because I was doing something stupid. Almost all of my black friends have been stopped in traffic for no good reason. This is not an exceptional thing. This is an ongoing thing. And I told him my email today about an African-American pastor, and he was pulled, and the policeman, first words were, where'd you get that car? And then he pulled him out of the car and he frisked him. Now, I've never had that happen. I've never had to make a decision about, do I run? Do I fight? I don't know. I don't think I would receive that very graciously, but so I've never had that happen. So we just had these different lived experiences. Who was it? Somebody this morning, Spencer this morning at Readyset Pray pointed out, is sometimes people hear white privilege and they think, my life's been hard. White privilege doesn't imply your life hasn't been hard or won't be hard. It just implies that your skin color won't be one of the things that makes it hard. And that's right. And skin color does make it hard for non-white people. I tried to bring up the idea after the George Floyd thing. Let me just speak openly and see whom I can get in trouble with here. Where Lisa and I used to live, in that part of Southeast Charlotte, we had some very conservative neighbors. And so after the George Floyd thing, they were just saying crazy things. I'm sorry. And so I tried to turn the tables on that. And I said, okay, it's not anti-police per se. I said, what if on Richardson Drive, where we used to live, a wealthy white woman got pinned to the ground by a black policeman kneeling on her neck, and she died from that? Like, what would that be, right? So sometimes just like shift the race around and think about things a little bit differently. I mean, if you want an edgy conversation that's just hard for Myers Park people to handle, is if we talk about white privilege. I heard somebody bring this up the other day. They'd sent their children to Charlotte Country Day, and you got to kind of, it's not a bad thing, but you got to kind of own that our private schools were formed from people that didn't want to go to integrated schools back in the day. And I love many of my good friends. Their children are in private schools. So it's not like that's not a bad thing, but that's some real privilege. You know, if you're a kid, I guess it's a privilege. I tend to think you miss out on some things, but anyway, that's neither here nor there. I started to do a lot of research for this and decided not to. I did pick up this book by Jim Wallace that I would commend to everyone. It's called America's Original Sin, Racism, White Privilege, and the Bridge to a New America. Wallace is always good. And one of the things he says in there is this: white Americans tend to see unfortunate incidents based on individual circumstances, while most Black Americans see systems in which their Black lives matter less than white lives. You notice that? This happens all the time. So like there's, I have loads of people, you know, they've looked at the tape of George Floyd's death and they're saying, in that case, that policeman did the wrong thing. He should go to jail for that. He should go to jail for that, right? But you see, we tend to isolate that one instance, whereas because it's to white advantage to do that. It's just a thing. Whereas Black people are able to see there's actually a whole system that's working against us here. That's interesting. Just briefly, white supremacy. People hear white supremacy and they get hysterical if you think that they're a part of that. Because again, they're picturing, you know, the guys in Charlottesville with rebel flags and guns and scary people who are intimidating others. That's white supremacy. But there's a more benign form, and I thought about this. We had a woman in, maybe some of you came a few years ago, an African-American theologian named Christina Cleveland. She gave a great talk at our church. And I got her to come and speak to area clergy the next day for lunch. And so she came, and we were at tables, and she said, at your table, talk about what are some sacred things in the city of Charlotte, of how things happen that nobody really talks about, but it's kind of a real thing. So 3 different tables said, you know, there's a cluster of, you know, wealthy people who've been around a long time, and they sort of meet and decide how things ought to be. And Christina said, oh, you mean white supremacists? And I kind of gagged for a nanosecond, like, I can't believe she said that. And I thought, well, that's right. They're not the rebel flag toting guys, but white people who think we can decide what's best for others. And the relatively benign form of it that I see all the time, and you'll hear me nagging about this, is white people, you know them, you may be one of them. We all are at some time or another, right? Who they think they understand Black people and what they really ought to be doing. And it may be criticism of their family structure, it may, whatever. Like we know best about other people that we've not actually gotten to know or listen to or anything else. That's like a weird form of white supremacy. And then finally, people talk a lot about white fragility, and it takes all kind of funny forms. I think right now we see a lot of it. You have a lot of white people now that they're kind of woke for the first time, which is good. But then there's this sort of guilt, like, oh, that's not helpful. And then, of course, you have people saying, I'm not racist. That's like the worst form of white fragility, right? And we've said over and over, I said this to the church and got some people annoyed, but it's not enough now to say I'm not racist. We have to be anti-racist, right? It is not enough to say I'm not racist. That won't do. We have to be anti-racist. And then people, again, another deflector. All the deflectors are white fragility, right? So people say, well, I have a Black friend. Again, it's great, lovely. And the thing that some of us have been joking about recently, I've been on a lot of conference calls with area leaders, Black and white, political leaders, church leaders, just what do we do as a city? And the joke that we make is like, don't form another book club. Now, it's not a bad thing right now to be reading books about something that you didn't know about. But at the end of the day, if white people meet and we read the Jim Wallace book, or we read Christina Cleveland's book, or we read Austin Channing Brown's, but there's so many great books. If you read those books and then pat yourself on the back, I'm sorry, you're a little more enlightened, but that's about all. I mean, nothing really happens. So anyway, that's another form of white. I've talked longer than I meant to. So that's kind of my thinking about kind of my life and how I've seen white stuff as a white guy. So, Nathan, let's talk to people. Talk to us.
Yeah. What you got, Britt?
Well, Tom had brought up earlier about isn't white privilege negative? And I think some of the effects of it are negative, but we were talking about really in and of itself, it just is. I think maybe that's what you said earlier. It's just something that is. What you do with it, I guess, the behavior following that may have. But white privilege in of itself just is, and some people I don't think even know that.
My
Yeah.
birth certificate says white Caucasian. It's not my fault. I didn't pick it. It just is. It's not horrible. Anyway.
My question was more like, once people understand white privilege, isn't it a negative to just let it lie and not say that these are negative results from white supremacy? I mean, I think that's
Can you
taking
lay
a
it?
neutral position is that it's not plus or minus, it just is. That's not right from my perspective. It's wrong, and we should start thinking about long-term, or short-term if we can, but long-term, how are we going to make sure it doesn't impact the Black people?
I mean, how do I lay down my privilege? How do I share my privilege?
That's right. And it's a privileged point, Tom, to what you're saying of you become aware of it. If you become aware of it and stay in that space and are not maximizing, back in 2016 when Charlotte was doing all those studies to how to make Charlotte better, one of the things that came out about it was like social capital. I mean, that's a huge form of white privilege, to have social capital. If I'll reference James here in the email, he talks about being able to contact a doctor on a whim. Like I don't have as many connections here in Charlotte as James or 3/4 of you guys. I could pick up a phone right now and find a doctor. I could pick up a phone right now and get a ride somewhere. And that's another form of white privilege. There's layers of it. And James, I really appreciate how you started naming the other layers that pile into white privilege. And the crux of it all is white supremacy. And that's probably the most cringy word that you'll hear. Like hearing white supremacy, you do think about, and at one point in my life, and maybe still I do when I hear, I'm like, ooh, those are the KKK members. Those are the members that are just really alt-right. Those are the ones that are really like brandishing the Nazi tattoos. I mean, all these things flood into my mind. But white supremacy is the controlling arm of so much of our socioeconomic ways that we have in our world. That's what Christine Cleveland named. Then you get into another term that has to be played into this too, is white fragility. And this goes to the deflection point too. White fragility is the tendency among members of the dominant white culture group to have a defensive, wounded, angry, or dismissive response to evidence of racism. And that's a super privileged point, because you can shut down, you can say, yeah, I'm the one that's on the top of the hierarchical structure, and I don't have to listen to this anymore. I'm going to walk away. And that's why we are in the situations that we are in right now. That's what's been really plaguing our world. That's that is the pandemic of 400 years, right? We have all of this pouring into this construct as we know as white supremacy, and that pours into the white privilege.
Well,
Britt, what else?
they had the meritocracy idea, right? So I worked hard, I did good. America is built where if you work hard, you can do good. And so therefore, if you've struggled, it's your fault. Like people love that all day long. And it's such a fiction. But anyway, y'all talk to us. What questions, what do y'all want to talk about?
I think a lot of it comes from what we have to take responsibility for and what we don't. So the idea of America being a meritocracy means that you're only responsible for yourself, but the idea that there is a privilege that you didn't earn means that you have to take responsibility for the systems that are in place, and that's a lot of work. And I feel like part of the problem of people acknowledging privilege is then you have to acknowledge that you benefit from the same systems that white supremacists benefit from, and that's a hard truth to swallow, I feel like, for a lot of people. So I don't know, that's just sort of some ideas that were floating around in my head, is that it's It's hard to feel like you have to take responsibility for something that you feel like you aren't a part of, and then realize you are a part of, and realize, oh, I am actually responsible for doing something about it. And I think it's easier if people believe that they are only responsible for themselves.
Like, I
Sure.
wish I could banish the word deserve from the English language. And you see it everywhere. You deserve a break today. I'm taking a few days off this week. And people are like, you deserve. We just talk about deserving all the time. And it's theologically, it's a curse, right? Because it means I deserve, it doesn't go anywhere good, right? So we're the beneficiaries of goodness. But then to think about all this, I may not deserve where I am and somebody else may deserve, and just it makes us crazy, right? Because we like to think I'm where I am because I was amazing, which is so ridiculous.
That gets to a point that Christina Cleveland has made in some of her writings and work. She talks about how privilege and oppression are ways that society either accommodates or alienates us. I mean, that's strong and powerful to think about. If everything has been accommodated to you because of who you are, it's the same as the contrast as, well, everything is against you because of who you are. And we know where that line draws down the, so we have a question from Kim Peters. What do you got, Britt? Can you read that?
Well, Kim was talking about being at church and starting to hear some of those comment, or from fellow church members rather, but starting to hear comments about, I'm tired of hearing about this white privilege thing, that kind of fatigue around it. I just don't understand what the Black people are so upset and why they're rioting. They want our monuments taken down. Their role, all these white fragility privilege statements. And she was basically saying, how do you respond to that? I mean, how do you, she said, what advice do you offer how to respond to the stunned look on your face? Which it is true. I mean, you start, at first you didn't hear, but some of those cracks are starting to come through and people are getting fatigued. That this is still
you
going
mean
on.
even without saying you are a doofus? No, you don't. So it seems to me, like everything else, I always try to channel Bill Roth when I can. So Bill's big on the non-anxious presence, right? So if you feed into people's anxiety, then you're going to respond really poorly to anything. It doesn't matter, right? So in this case, can you respond in a non-anxious way? So for instance, with rioting and looting, I mean, I'm sorry, one of our church members, I sent out my whatever after George Floyd, my message saying, part of what we need to do is befriend other people. And somebody responded to me and said, why would I befriend a Black person? They're looters, right? So that's part of what white people tend to do, is we lump everyone who is different into a category. We would not appreciate it if people assumed that white people, they raise rebel flags and fire guns in Charlotte. So we wouldn't appreciate that, right? But we're more than happy to lump all Black people together in some category. So somehow calmly to name, riot looters, that's a tiny minority of people. And I have the benefit, I have a lot of African-American friends, and I've talked to them about the looting. And if you think white people are mortified by it, talk to African-Americans. Like, they are like, oh my God, they so wish that wouldn't happen, because they lose capital in the art, right? So, but somehow just to kind of name that sort of thing to people, just facts are helpful, I think.
And one thing I would add to that, just because Kim, I had a couple of these occasions when same thing, I was just stunned. I didn't know how to respond. And this actually even happened right before George Floyd got into a political discussion about something which I thought was an absolute truth, and found when challenged, because we're surrounded so often by people who share our own ideas on and opinions on this. When I was challenged, I didn't really have the words to respond like I would have wanted to, even though I knew everything and I've read everything. What I encourage you to do, what I've started to do, is when I read something, I'm like that, and it really resonates with me, I read it out loud. I practice the words a little bit so that when I get to that point when someone says it, I have it. Because I read it and I agree with it and I move on, but I don't really internalize it. So I've really started to get in the habit of practicing and going through even verbally to make sure I have the words at hand when I need them.
And isn't there a burden on those of us who are on this call? I think I'm looking around. I don't know. Corey's black. I don't know who else is black on this call. So we've got a bunch of white people on this call, which that's not bad. We're just white people, right? But I at least can faithfully say, not I have a black friend. That's always misleading, right? But if you have a number of black friends and you talk to them regularly about things, you can speak to that. And I think there's some burden on us to, how do we befriend people? And that's tricky, isn't it? Because like at this point in history, I don't know, if I were a black person, I'd be so freaking exhausted by white people who want to be my friend so they can say they have a black friend, right? Like that's just annihilating. So it's won over time, and we've got to start now to befriend people so we can have something to say, not next week, but 10 years from now. I'm always amazed. I'll just tell you all this. It's incredible. I fairly regularly, I wish more, but I'm invited to speak at African-American churches. And when I'm there, when I'm introduced, it's interesting what they say. They don't say, he has a PhD from Duke. They don't care about that. They don't say he's a Myers Park Methodist. They don't care about that. What they'll say inevitably is James is someone we trust. Isn't that interesting? Like I never introduce a white person in a white program and I say, this is Nathan Arledge is someone we trust. So what is that, right? And then they'll say, and that trust has been won over 25 years, right? So you got to start investing yourself today in what you're going to want to be able to say 12 years from now. And you got to stay with it over time. You can't go have, like one potluck supper and we share dessert and then we go, oh, we don't like people. Isn't that fun? It's just so stupid. I'm sorry. Like it's fine, but it's kind of pathetic. You got to make real relationships. Who's in your home? Who do you go to dinner with? Who do you text? Who do you call? And all that. It's just a huge thing. And it's on us to work on that. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And be prepared too in those spaces. If you get called on something, if making those relationships and those trustworthy relationships with black and brown siblings, if they say, yo, that was a microaggression, or that was pretty racist, you need to think about how you say that again. Don't pout. Don't get mad and defensive and never go into that space again. Be respectful and say, oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for guiding me on that. And I think those are the spaces where it's okay to say, well, how should I have phrased that? I did this with Ray a lot. I've done it with with many friends. I'll say, I'm goof there. What should I have said? Or, hey, here's a real novel idea. We don't say anything at all. There are certain times that it is so good for us just not to talk. And as white folks, and to not have to assert our privilege into those spaces. There's so many times where we need to step back, we need to listen, and really take attention to what's happening. Or the phrase right now that's going on around is read the room. Read the room. Who is in the room? Who is it that we are being invited to be around? This is a gift of spiritual hospitality, right? That like being received, you have to allow yourself to be received, and you have to also be willing to give of your spirit to be received in spaces. So make sure that you're having yourself ready to receive what can come from those life-changing commitments in those relationships.
And I kind of like, so two thoughts on that. One is, ask people. I remember, Lisa and I hanging out with the Ezrings and, like, where do you eat? And instead of trying to like guess and figure it out, I'd say, Murray, where's a kosher, like, help me. Like, I don't know. I don't know kosher stuff. So help me with that. Right. So ask people to help you. But at the same time, we have to be very cautious. One of the things that Austin Channing Brown does so wonderfully, if you read her little book, what's that book called? Blank.
I'm still here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
wonderful book. And she came to our church and spoke. She was great. One of her things is she spent a lot of her life in largely white environments. And what happens if you're the one black person in a white environment, people look to you to like be, you are black people to us, right? And she said, nobody can bear that pressure, right? Because I'm not black people. I am a black person. Black people vary from one another. So if you ask me, what do I think? Well, here's something I think, but other black people think differently about that. So you got to know, you got to figure out how to know more than one person and not put the pressure on that one person. You know, when my friend Brenda Tapia, who died this past year, was alive, Brenda came and spoke to us. She did that great program you should watch if you haven't seen it. We've got it on our website about everything you wanted to ask a black person, but we're afraid to ask. Brenda's was really masterful at, people would say, what do black people think about whatever? And she would say, I can speak for myself and I can speak for some other black people that I have heard from, but I can't speak for all black people any more than any one of us. You know, if I said, Sandy, can you speak for all white people? Are you still on the program? I don't think so. Right.
Very true. Very true. What other questions, friends? What are some thoughts that are percolating in your hearts?
I'm going to call out somebody. Right. So,
oh, sorry. Go ahead.
So Corey Wallace, you're here. Thank you for coming.
You're welcome.
But you've been listening to this conversation. You go to our church. Talk to us.
I really love Austin's book, and I appreciate her perspective. She shares my experience.
She's amazing.
She is amazing. And one of the key things that she kind of touches on that I think it's important for this group to hear is that an element of white privilege means that if I am your only black friend, that friendship is conditional on your comfort. So I am unable to say things that are sometimes hard to hear. And I know that from a very young age. I'm taught that, I'm shown that, it's reinforced in me that I am to be amenable, diplomatic, calm, unemotional. And you'll see some of my posts on James. When James posts some things, sometimes I try and like insert a perspective.
Awesome. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. But sometimes it does not land well. And as I've gained resilience in this work, and as you do this work with other people who want to grow with you, it can be very lonely. So if I were to give you any advice, it's to keep doing this work together, because white fragility makes you feel very isolated. And that is not how we should exist. So yeah, I've loved this conversation. Thank you for letting me sit in this space with you.
Oh gosh, thanks for coming.
Thank you for sitting.
Corey. And some of it, I think, while you were saying that, I was reminded of something that happened recently, and I would encourage everybody to like dig deep always. So we had the incident, I did the little video and it went viral of, we had a staff member whose 9-year-old son, so here's how I prefaced it, like he's been in my house, he plays the piano, he's 9, like, so everything looks sweet, right? And he was playing, he was on his scooter on the street, and a white guy's car came by, slowed down, man pointed a gun at him threateningly, and this scared the daylights out of him. He ran home. Now, I posted that video, and I kind of wish I hadn't, right? So I did it, and people were mortified. I would say see if I can say this, my most racially insensitive relatives were mortified by that. right? So if you got a pulse, you're mortified by that. But then here's how the white fragility works, right? So you're mortified by that, and then you feel pretty good about yourself with respect to race. Like, I'm opposed to that kind of thing. Well, everybody's opposed to that kind of thing, right? So the question in that story, two things. This is amazing to me. So the question in that story is, so I say it's a 9-year-old boy who's a sweet boy who likes to play the piano. But this shouldn't happen to a 37-year-old who is 6'4" and weighs 200 pounds, right? And the guy going by pointing the gun, what white people have got to get, they got to get to this point is that there's some shred of whatever that is in all of us.
Yep.
There's some shred of that in all of us. And now here's the other amazing thing, right? So I'll tell this. This was absolutely amazing. So I had this Facebook war the other day. It was just awful. So one of my kinfolk with Howell blood, right, said, basically it came down to saying, I think your coworker made up that story. They do things like that. Now here's the amazing part. My coworker, I told her that. I said, this is what my relative said. You know what she said to me? She said, don't let her bad attitude cloud your love for her. So here's somebody who, just because of how she looks, is thought to be dishonest and horrible. She has mercy and kindness toward that person. I can't. I'm just moved. I don't know how to respond to that. It's just incredible.
Absolutely. And it goes even broader, and that's part of this whole part of the white privilege we have to examine too, is the systems that it creates, and that's systems that have been created on white privilege, white supremacy. Fragility is, I think, the underpinning that keeps it all sustained, right? There's so much white fragility and tender, and you get wounded and angry, and so we're going to shut down the conversation. The one thing that I've been troubled by in all of the white rage and the righteous rage, like, my God, George Floyd, my God, Breonna, my God, Elijah, like, there's so many that keep on, and people are like shocked. They're like, it happened again. And what's so painful, and those are the names we know, right? Those are the names that are being told to us. This isn't even, I mean, we can get real deep and heavy on this too, of the white privilege and supremacy of all the children still in the cages, all the Native Americans, the Trail of Tears. I mean, this goes back so much and is so present. And so my question, and perhaps more of, not a question, more of a charge, is quit being surprised. Quit being surprised in the space that it happened again. Instead, find those places that you need to start engaging and finding the systems that you can contribute to help deconstruct and to abolish, get rid of these systems that are causing the death of Black and brown siblings, that have caused the death of thousands and millions of Black and brown bodies, that have physically uprooted whole people groups to benefit white supremacy. It's still happening. We see it just in different iterations. We see it throughout education with segregation. We see it throughout redlining in our communities and our cities. The number 2 most segregated city in the United States, I heard this on NPR, I don't know which one's number 1, is Milwaukee. Like, that just blows, like, Milwaukee. I mean, but that's how prevalent it is. And they were making the reference in the conversation about, where you are supposed to go. That's white privilege all over the place. And so it's up to us to deconstruct that. Well, we have it here in Charlotte. We have the history that has just plagued this city, that we have to do our work and our hardest efforts to break down the segregation barriers and boundaries that have put us in the places that we are today and that we are going forward into. So my charge is we got to get to work. We've got to continue. That's my whole spiel at the beginning. We've got to do that personal formation, that personal rig formation, and allow that to really lead you out into this world, so that we can make this place a better place, and that we are not keeping systems that are holding people back because of their race, and of where we are with our privilege. We've got a couple more minutes. Any thoughts? Any other questions?
Yeah, I was wanted to make a point about spending more time in our history and really making sure we understand how we got to this point. And I just finished reading this book on account of race, and it goes through the whole legal system through Reconstruction, Jim Crow, and how many of the southern states tried to protect the white-only voting rights. And it's just unbelievable.
They're still doing that, Tom.
No, that's my point, James. Can I finish my comment?
Wait, I'm sorry.
The point was, I think the more we understand the history of this, we can project it onto our current situation and find things today. Like right now, I'm in the League of Women Voters, and we're trying to get people to do mail-in ballots because we don't know what's going to happen on November 3rd. So we have to project what happened before, when people couldn't vote for decades and couldn't change things. And sometimes I think that helps us to understand how bad the situation is today, because these are to some extent the same people that are existing today that are making the laws, and that's what we need to change, I feel.
Absolutely. Anyone else?
Quick comment about white fragility, relating to what James posted about our staff member who had the son have that awful experience. That night, my phone blew up with a parent of a youth who we've gone back and forth. He didn't like the idea of youth having this discussion, and we are, and our series continues tomorrow night. But anyway, his point and his problem with the whole thing was James used the word we instead of they. And he said, when James said we have to be anti-racist, I'm not anti-racist, they have to be anti-racist. And I just said, no. when James said we, he means all of us. And I agree, like, we have to do better. We got to be part of the solution. We got to rise up. We got to stand with people. Like, man, don't be so fragile to not understand that it's we, it's not they. And so just understand that's what we're dealing with people that we worship with, that we love, that we want to be part of our church. I do love him, but I wish he viewed that differently.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jason. Jason and Sarah doing a great job leading a conversation on Tuesday nights around this with our youth. Every other Wednesday, this Wednesday is the one that comes up. Jessica and Amy are leading a conversation around the book, Raising White Kids. And I say all of this, and there's a letter being constructed right now too. Friends, we have a church that we're willing and we're wanting to dive into this conversation because we know it is a matter of life or death for our Black and brown siblings, and that's physical death, but it's also on us. That this is a spiritual death that we can face too if we don't really own into this space, and if we're not really naming this racism that is so plaguing our world, that we spiritually we die and decay, and that's not what we want. We want to continue to grow. We want to continue to flourish in the spaces. So I love you guys. I'm thankful for you all being with us. This might have been one, it's like a hard conversation. And and I hope it was, but perhaps you're down the road. Maybe you're close to graduating, understanding this, but I don't think so. We all have so much work to do, and I hope that you will continue doing it. Know that we are here for you to continue doing it. We continue to have resources. Britt just put them up, a way for you to sign up for a newsletter if you don't already subscribe to that for the next week's conversation and resources. We'll be on the website. They'll be on our Facebook page and everything, because we want to continue it. So next week, I'm excited to welcome Dr. Jessica Sachs. Jessica has been with us before in conversation. She joined us about a year ago when Jonathan Wilson Hartgrove was with us, and talking about the medical discrepancies within the Black community. So I'm really looking forward to that. But she's also going to be joined by Chiamaka Akanakwo, who is a third-year student, pre-med student at UNCC, and she and her are going to lead us in those conversations. And we're really going to focus on the systemic racism as it pertains to medical discrepancies, especially as it's really been highlighted to the 10th degree with COVID, and how just again, to use the overused term, is plaguing. It really is, and it's killing folks. And so I hope that you will join us. Jessica's a treat. Chiamaka, from our conversations, she's been just great to learn and get to know as well. So invite friends, invite your medical friends, and perhaps we can make headway on some of those issues as well. James, thank you so much for your wisdom. Thank you so much for leading us in conversation tonight, and journeying with us this week.
Let me add, on behalf of everybody who's in this room, that our gratitude is to Nathan for having the mind and the heart to say, let's do the series now, and putting it together in such an intelligent and faithful way. So Nathan, thank you.
So, Jason, you guide us in prayer.
Love to. Loving God, this is tough. We love you. We love each other. You call us to love one another. Your word says that we are disciples. People we will know that we're disciples, that we follow you based on how we love one another. And I pray that you challenge us on that. Help us get out of our comfort zones. If all the people that we love look just like us, it's time to change. Allow us to have the hard conversations with our friends of color and let them know that we stand with them, we love them. We're going to mess up and say the wrong things, but we're not going anywhere. And that we want to be the church that is with them and says the right things and learns and makes change happen within our city. And that's going to take some bold moves. And it starts with a group like this on a night like this. So we're grateful for the words that have been shared. I pray that it spurs within us desire to do more, to learn more, to listen more, and to grow in our faith and in our understanding of what's really going on in the world around us. Thank you for tonight. We love you. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Thank you guys so much. If you like this face, you'll see it leading Readyset Pray tomorrow morning at 8:30. We hope you'll be there, and I look forward to sharing in prayer with you in the morning. And it's every morning of the week, Monday through Friday, 8:30. So if you can't make it tomorrow, please do join us. It's a great way to start us and center us for the day.
It is. It's wonderful. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Peace, y'all.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.